Hello and welcome to Husky Talk. I am your host, the best podcast host in the universe, Steve Cully. And with me today, a very special guest, Dave Schuman, Coach Schuman, who is a guru in the football world. He runs camps, he coaches, he's knowledgeable, he helps with recruiting, he does it all. So, Coach, I wanted to thank you for being with us today.
Oh, I'm excited to be on. I've seen a lot of the stuff you've been doing with the Husky guys. It's been fantastic.
That's what I keep hearing. I never anticipated the impact that it would have. People have really enjoyed it a lot, and it's kind of connected us all back together, which is great, which is what we need. Because we got to get UConn football back on top, back to where we can get into a bowl game, we can get a TV contract, and we get something, right?
Hell or high water. We need to make that move.
We definitely do. We got to do something. We can't stay status quo. I wanted to start off. You're a Jersey guy. Is that where you grew up? You grew up in Jersey?
Yes, I grew up in Jersey. Yep, northern New Jersey.
What town did you grow up in?
Saddlebrook, Bergen County.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just know. My uncle went to Montclair State, and he lives in Jersey. Yep. So I hear, and his girlfriend works at Rutgers. Went to Rutgers, so they go to all the Rutgers games.
Yes.
Did you start playing football at an early age? Did you play like at the Pop Warner level, at the lower levels, or did you start playing at school?
I started playing 9 years old. Started playing football. Yeah. So
you're just like me. Okay.
Third grade, maybe. It must have been third grade.
Yep. It's third or fourth grade. I had Shane Stafford on last night, and he wanted to make sure I said hello to you. I talked to Steve Darby the other day, and he also wanted me to say hello to you. Yeah. So you're a very popular guy.
I saw you had Phil Hudd on too. I think a couple of days.
Yeah,
ago.
I did. Yeah,
or you released it.
Phil was awesome, and I'm so happy he's coming home.
Oh yeah, from what, North Dakota? I guess, is that where he was, or
yeah. He's coming to UConn. He's going to be working in the president's office. And
okay.
He's going to try to get some stuff done, and I think he can do it. I mean, he's got such a charismatic personality, and I think he's capable of really taking charge. And he's going to, like, when it's a funny story, when he wanted to call me before coming on the show, just because the way I do the show, I never plan anything, because the podcasts I listen to, I like everything to be spontaneous. I like the reactions to be authentic. I don't like scripting anything.
Right.
I think that kind of made him nervous. So he kind of interviewed me, and then he was telling me about his job at UConn, and it's going in one ear and out the other. I'm not really paying attention. I'm just like, why is he so concerned about this interview? And then he calls me again, and we're talking. And then again, he's talking about his job, and I go, of course, you don't know me, but I'm oblivious to everything. It finally hits me. I go, oh my God, like, you're a somebody. Like, you're going to have pull. You're in the president's office. You're going to be like their counsel and like making decisions. Like, you're big time. He's like, well, yeah, kind of. I was like, wow. And I've been like clueless the entire two conversations we had. And that's why, like, you wanted to know what we were going to talk about and be careful about anything said, because you're going into this great job. So I thought that was awesome. But you played football early on. What was your position throughout Pop Warner?
Tailback. I played a little bit of quarterback. Here and
wow.
there, but mostly tailback. And then the school I went, the area that I went to, everybody played both ways, because it was
that's how I was.
Town. So I do remember defensively, probably, I probably played linebacker or defensive end as a kid, but I remember, obviously I was a tailback, so that was the biggest thing.
Now, did you love football early on? Like when you first started playing 9, 10, 11, 12 years old? Is that where you developed a love for it, or did it come later?
Mine probably became, earlier, I was itching to play as soon as I possibly could. Nowadays, you could play. I mean, some of the states like Texas and Florida, kids are probably playing, I don't know, 5, 6 years old,
They do,
um,
yeah.
which is wild. But back then, you couldn't play until you were in third grade. So I played for the
Mhm.
very first time I could, but I would have played probably earlier if I could. So
That's
it
crazy, yeah.
yeah, it was in my blood. I mean, my parents made me wrestle at 6 years old because that was the only sport they would let me back then that they would let you do at that age.
Right.
So because I was too rambunctious.
Yeah, you need to get rid of some of that energy.
So they're like, wrestling will take you. Go do
And
that.
wrestling's tough, man. Wrestling really makes you tough, which
Yeah,
is good. I mean, that builds toughness.
it
You're
definitely
one
will.
on one in there, and the stamina and conditioning you have to have. I mean, to do that, I'm sure that prepared you for football.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely indirectly, I'm sure it did because I was doing that for a few years before I even started started playing football. So, yeah, it was always I did it throughout youth sports, so wrestling. I did a lot of sports. I mean, those did wrestling, I did track, I did baseball. You know, and each season we just jump to the different thing.
Well, I might as well ask you now then, just because today's athletes, everything is so specialized, and kids kind of have to pick between one sport or the other. Do you believe in that model, or do you believe that kids should be able to play, whatever they want?
I think they should be able to play whatever they want. It's
Yeah,
very difficult. I have a 9-year-old my son who plays
right.
every sport, and you already could see how there's so much crossover. Like you'll play three
Yeah.
sports in the same season, so because everything is like somewhat year round. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
It's like eight months out of the year if you're playing any kind of travel sport. But you really have to know what I think your kid likes to do, and I think that's a big
Right,
thing. Every kid's different. My kid is different than I was, and I was
sure.
really I love sports, but we didn't really you didn't really know what was available unless your parent brought
No.
you down to the municipal hall to sign you up for it. So because you basically just played outside and you played with your friends and you played whatever sport was available, whether it was
Right.
football, basketball, baseball, wiffle ball, whatever it was. But they signed you up. The only reason you knew, you go down to municipal hall and you signed up for a sport. Now you could sign up for everything anytime. So
You would say that you're a proponent of kids playing multiple sports because there is
absolutely
crossover and it helps them get better. I got you.
huge
Now,
huge crossover.
it's good to hear you say that because I know so many parents and I know so many young kids that have like personal trainers at 9 years old and they're focused on just this one sport and they
Yep.
don't they don't they don't get to experience anything else. And I just think that's insane. I mean, let your kid play. I
I think
mean, the
it's
more the
limiting.
better.
Yeah, it's limiting because you first of all you don't know what they're going to be good at down the line. I think
Mm,
that's one of the as kids develop, and I've been doing this for a long time. I can't tell you how many times I had kids that were just basketball players, didn't want to play football, come out for football, and they become a Division 1 athlete in football. And so
wow.
you could do a certain sport, and you may end up being better at another sport. That's why I think playing multiple sports is great. It's great from a crossover standpoint. It lessens injuries. I think it develops overall athleticism, which applies to anything. So seventh,
It's the
eighth grade,
same movement. Yeah.
yeah, seventh, eighth grade, you decide you don't want to play XYZ sport, okay, anymore, and maybe you got burnt out by that sport. Well, if you've been playing multiple sports, you can pick up another sport a lot easier. than if you've been highly specialized. And
I never thought of it like that.
That's what happens. They drop out of sports completely.
Right.
They're highly specialized. And let's say they get to high school and I'm not quite as good as I thought I was going to be. And they drop out of sports completely instead of picking up another sport.
I never thought of it like that. That makes a lot of sense. So I know you ended up playing defense at UConn,
Yep.
but like in junior high, did you stay playing both ways because you were at a smaller school still?
Yep.
Did you like playing running back?
Yeah, I mean, tailback was my favorite position. Obviously carried the ball, so that was the biggest thing. I enjoyed scoring touchdowns. So yeah, from junior high school, I was tailback, but I played mostly defensive back in high school for 3 of my 4 years. I was a safety, and then my senior year they moved me to outside linebacker because by that, I mean, mostly throughout my high school career, I was carrying the football. But I was splitting carries until I got to be a junior. In my junior year, I was carrying the ball a lot.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, carrying it probably 20, 25 times a game. And then senior year, definitely 20, 25 times a game, sometimes more. So
you weren't coming off the field.
No, I never. I was in high school. This will make you laugh because it's so rare now. Because first of all, I went to a small school, so in New Jersey it's called Group 1. Connecticut,
Right.
I guess it would be equivalent to what is it? Class S, I think, is the small.
Yeah, it's SLLL. Yeah.
So
yeah,
we probably would be like an S or in Connecticut. So it was a small school. I was the running back. I was a defensive back for most of my career. Then the linebacker last year. I was the punter. I was the kick returner. I was the kickoff guy. And then yeah, I was all conference punter.
Oh my God.
Yep, I was the punt returner. And then for a while they tried me at I think my junior or sophomore junior year, I was the extra point and field goal kicker, even though that was the line they eventually realized, okay, he can't do this because I was probably like 4 for 8 on extra points, which is terrible.
We were probably gassed from scoring the touchdowns, and now you got to kick the extra point.
Yeah, it was a different world.
Did you fill the water and do the laundry too? I mean, you did. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was a small school, and the philosophy back then, and this was the early 90s, the philosophy was like, if you had a good athlete, you would try to ride it, and as much as you could. Yeah, I mean, it's totally different than how football is now. It's changed so much. And even the running back position obviously has changed a lot. But when I went to UConn, I went there that was one of the harder things in my recruiting process because I was a tailback and I carried the ball a lot, and I was a safety at a small school where a lot of teams didn't throw the ball that much, right? So I was tackling most of the time. So in recruiting, it was difficult to figure out if there was another spot that I actually, that I could do. But I was a 6'1", 220-pound tailback. So obviously you thought, okay, maybe you could play somewhere else. So that's why I went to UConn as a fullback initially and started there under the first coach. And then when Holtz came in,
So you were there for Jackson.
Oh yeah, I was there, Jackson. Yes.
Okay, you were recruited by Jackson. So in high school, junior and senior year, I mean, you obviously stood out. Did you play varsity as a sophomore as well?
I played from the time I entered high school. I was on varsity. Yeah.
Oh my God, you played 4 years of varsity.
Yes. Yeah.
And did you start all 4 years? I mean,
I started off 4 years. My freshman year, I think I was like a sub until like game 2 or 3. I think it was game 3. The middle linebacker went down with an injury, and I played middle linebacker. Even though I was a safety at the time, I played middle linebacker, and I had a great game. And from that point forward, I was playing somewhere, starting every week. So mostly on defense as a freshman, but I was the kick returner as a freshman.
God, that's
So
incredible.
yeah.
Were you still wrestling as well?
No, I stopped wrestling in 8th grade. That was the last year I wrestled. What was 8th grade. I did football and I ran track in high school.
What events did you run in track?
I was a hurdler.
You ran the 110s at 6 feet tall?
Yep. So
How did you do with that?
I was state small school champ in the high hurdles indoors. Senior year, I placed in 4 events I think I was second in the intermediate hurdles, third in the high hurdles, and
Oh my God.
Yep. I ran the mile relay, and I think I was third in the long jump. So I went 21 feet in the long jump.
That's amazing. So you were a state champion in track as well.
Yeah. Yep.
That's just wow. Congratulations. I mean, that's
That's a long time ago.
It doesn't matter. Like I did track too. I finished third in the shot put in the States. That was the best I did. So for you to do as well as you did, that's incredible. In 2 sports. I mean, my God.
Yeah. Yep. I would
congratulations on that.
Oh, thank you. And my business now, what I do, I would say it's hard to understand how good. So, and we were FCS, obviously, when I was at UConn. I think our first Division I class might've been when I was a 5th-year senior, was that freshman group, was the group I think that ended up going D1. So I always tell athletes, like, you don't realize how good these athletes are that are getting scholarships, the level that they're at. And the work that they put in, it's elite.
It's second to none. It's not like any other sport. I mean, football is football. What other schools recruited you? Because I'm sure
most of that conference. So I went on my official visit. I stopped my official visits after UConn. So I committed to them. That was my 3rd visit. But I visited Princeton. Then I visited, yep. So I could have went to almost any of the Ivy Leagues other than Harvard. And only reason Harvard didn't recruit me is because they came in and they said, "Hey, do you want to go to Harvard?" And I was a 17-year-old kid, didn't know anything. I was like, I don't know. They're like, we need to know if you want to go to Harvard. So I was like, well, I don't know right now, So
you must have had good grades then too.
I was a very good student. I was probably probably top 10, top 15% in my class. And but it was, it's a little different now, but back then I had very good grades, and I had good SAT scores, but they weren't amazing. But Princeton and most of the Ivy Leagues, if you were a guy they wanted,
they had flexibility.
They had some level of flexibility. I mean, they couldn't go crazy, but they had some level of flexibility. But yeah, I got recruited by most of the old Yankee Conference, which was like UMass, UConn, New Hampshire,
Delaware, Northeastern.
Yeah, most of those schools. Delaware did not recruit me, but most of those schools recruited me. And Temple, Maryland. I would say that those were my 2 Division I offers at the time, and they happened to be at the time. Although Maryland ended up being good, but at the time they ended up being they were among the worst in FBS. So that would change over time, but at that time it was that's where they were. But yeah, those are mostly the schools that almost all the Yankee Conference schools, a lot of the Ivies, the Lehigh Lafayette's, those schools,
the Patriot League schools, yeah,
Patriot League schools, and Maryland Temple. That was really the gist of it.
What won you over about UConn?
My visit was really the difference maker. And as you know, that the football players back then, especially during the Tom Jackson era, they knew how to have a good time.
They were badasses. All I hear about that group, the group that you played with, was like the last group of freaking tough badasses.
They were
grown men.
They played hard. They worked hard. They had fun. Everything was 100 miles an hour. So the visit was great. I really enjoyed. Actually, number one thing for me was the camaraderie. I thought among the
That's what
team.
everyone says.
Yeah,
Everyone says the camaraderie like made the difference with a lot of the guys. Shank said that. Um, Stafford said that, and Phil did as well.
yeah, and those
So
are all guys that I was good friends with. Shane was my roommate for a couple of years, and Shank I'm good friends with. So yeah, I mean, I think, and they're a couple of years younger than me, but that was always the thing I thought that made our group unique was the camaraderie. I mean, I felt it
yeah,
the second I came in there, and the second I went out and I met the different guys. I'll tell you one of the other unique things because I went on different visits, and obviously even before I went on my official visits, I went to other places that were recruiting me, like Syracuse and schools like that. What I thought was unique about UConn was it didn't matter who you were, like everybody got along, and I'm talking like along racial lines, everything. Like
yeah,
it was a
yeah,
unique thing. I had been to some other places that I didn't feel comfortable. See, I grew up in New Jersey and Saddlebrook. It's that northern New Jersey area is very diverse, right?
yes, yes,
So if you come from New Jersey, like you're used to certain things, and UConn, I felt right away was like, wow, it didn't matter what group I talked to, what group of guys, they were all cool, and they were easy to get along with, and they all had kind of the same objective, and they all knew how to have fun. So I was like, this is the place for me.
and I agree with you. And for me, it felt like all the athletes really supported each other. It didn't matter what sport you played.
Yep,
Everyone kind of came together as a family. If you were an athlete, it was really a jock school. Like
it
everyone
was, yeah.
supported each other, went to each other's games, and hung out together. And that's what made the difference. My other question to you, because this was something I did not know. Shank told me this, and Shane had told me this, that Lou Perkins, there were conversations as early on back in 94, 95, maybe even earlier about moving to 1A to FBS. Did they mention that at all with you? Did you
Yeah.
did you hear any rumbling? They did. Okay.
So that was part of the recruitment when that was the sell. So that by the time you were a senior, you were going to be playing 1A schools. And I
Yeah.
think that was the sell for a couple of years before that, even because I heard that even from um, guys like Eddie Long and Nowden and Dandridge. They kind of mentioned those kind of things too in the recruiting process, but nobody knew if that was going to happen or not. But it was a pitch, like it was part of Jackson's pitch that you're going to have an opportunity to play Division I. So when you had like what I had at the time, a couple of like 1A, lower 1A, but they weren't, top tier programs. And then
Right.
at the time, at least, they weren't top tier programs. And then you had FCS program, what's called now FCS programs that were recruiting you, and one might be Division I. That was definitely part of the sell. And obviously, eventually, it happened, but that was the sell back in 1992.
Yeah, I couldn't believe hearing that. I had no idea that it had gone back that far, that they were planning on moving up. The other thing that Shank and Phil Hunt and Shane had told me, they were promised, not promised, but it kind of indicated to them that they were going to be able to play right away. And they ended up redshirting, and it kind of ticked them off. Did they tell you that you were going to have a chance to play right away? And did you end up redshirting?
I did end up redshirting. Mine was probably a little more because of injury. So
Okay.
I tore my meniscus, I think it might have been like week 3. I was still, I think, number 3 on the 3 or 4, no, I was 3 on the depth chart at the time. So I was not quite there. You know what I
Were
mean?
you
Where
traveling?
I had traveled a couple of times. Yeah, I traveled a few times. So but I wasn't quite there. I was probably 3 or 4, I would say, at the time on the depth chart, but they were trying to get me ready to have an opportunity to possibly have a chance to break in, like specials and maybe a little bit here and there. But I got injured, so that basically took me out into the end, near the end of the season. I came back, I think, at the last couple of weeks, but
They managed to keep your red shirt.
yeah, I just stayed redshirted. Yeah, there was no point at that point in putting me in.
And had you been playing offense at this time, or had they
Yeah, I was
moved you to
offense.
the Oh,
Yeah.
wow, okay.
So I came in as a
So
fullback. Yeah, I came in as a
yeah,
fullback. That was when they ran the old school I.
yeah,
And
I heard.
yep.
Was
And
that when Chad Martin was there? That everyone tells me about Chad Martin.
Chad was with Holtz. So
Okay,
Chad came in. I think I want to say he might be Shane's group, or
yeah,
maybe I think he's
I
Shane's
think
group.
you're right. I think you're right.
Shane and
I
Shaq
just
group,
keep
yeah.
getting the errors
Yeah,
because you're a
yeah.
different era than them.
Yeah, God rest his
Now
soul. God rest his soul.
I know. R.I.P. Now I heard Tom Jackson wasn't the most pleasant coach in the world. Like he wouldn't be defined as a quote unquote players coach. Is that an accurate statement?
He was kind of standoffish. So not in recruiting, by the way. In
No,
recruiting,
no,
he was
they
a
love you
tiger.
recruiting.
He was a great recruiter. He was one of the better recruiters that I came across. But as far as like when you came on campus, it was basically when you got on the field, he paid attention to you. If you weren't on the field, he wasn't paying any attention
He
to
didn't
you.
want to know you. Yeah.
No, but he was always pretty good to me. I
Good.
mean, we had our moments here and there. I mean, I was a little I was a rambunctious kid from Jersey in the beginning.
You're a
So
Jersey guy.
yeah,
Jersey guys are man, Jersey guys are tough. I have never met a Jersey guy that isn't tough and physical and not afraid to hit people. So
yeah,
Jersey is one of the best states for football in the country, right?
yeah,
I mean,
yes.
Jersey,
Especially
Texas, California, PA, right?
Jersey's probably a top 10 state.
Yeah,
Um,
and for its size
definitely
too.
known for toughness. Definitely known for good football. And there are some places that have really good football in Jersey. Like where I grew up is still that's where the Bergen Catholics and the Donbass, a lot of powerhouse
RMS.
programs. Yeah, yeah. And we had my roommate my first 3 years was a Bergen Catholic kid, Zeke Rogers. So
Okay.
yeah, he was from my recruiting class. But yeah, no Jersey, but Jackson was. I tell you, Jackson. I thought he was pretty fair. I thought that he was a great recruiter. He had some fantastic coaches with him, but it was a different time.
It was a different era, I know.
Yeah, Holtz really ushered in a newer era of football, and that's when I moved over to linebacker, because he didn't, the eye as it was run back then. I mean, they still used it, but it wasn't the same. He didn't use it in the same kind of
No, he
capacity.
used more 11 personnel stuff too,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
And I also wanted to ask you because back then, and even with me when I was getting recruited, this was back in the day where you were copying VHS tapes and
Correct.
sending them out to everywhere. I
Correct.
remember my father got one of those machines where he could dub the game films
Yep.
really fast. And, God, we must have sent out 100 of them. So it was a lot harder to get recruited and you're sending them out, but at least at Jersey, like I'm in upstate New York.
Right.
Coaches aren't coming here to look at us. We have bad football.
Right.
You at least probably had more coaches coming to see you in school.
We
right?
did. Because Bergen County was definitely, because it's near the city, and it was definitely a place that coaches stopped in at. When
Right.
I was getting recruited, it was interesting because my coaches hadn't quite moved over to VHS yet. So one of the
They haven't.
They were still on 16 millimeter.
The rolls?
The
Oh
rolls. I still have Steve. I still have like one or two of them. Like the coach, when I left school, like he basically was like he gave me one or two of the like my better games. And he gave me the rolls. He gave it
That's
because it's
hilarious.
not like they were going to need it anymore, But you had the rolls, so they had to come in to watch the rolls. So that was
Oh
during
my
the whole.
God.
Yeah, VHS was becoming a thing. I think the last 2 years becoming a thing. My coaches just hadn't moved over to it yet because they liked the old school stuff. And we had a parent that had with VHS the games from the stands. And to send out, in order to send
Oh,
out to the
okay.
colleges, I had to ask a parent who was really primarily videoing his kid. It just
Right.
had
He's not watching you.
Right, his kid happened to be. I was the tailback. His kid was the fullback. So luckily, he was in the same general
It
area
worked
most of
out.
the time.
Yeah. Oh my
So
God, that's hilarious. So how many years at UConn were you playing fullback?
I played 2 years at fullback. So my redshirt year, and then my redshirt freshman year. I started the last 3 games at fullback. I split time with Ed Nook the first, I guess, 7 or so games, and then I was a starter the last 3 games. Then Holtz came in. I had a back injury, had to sit out a year. And then when I came back the last 2 years, when I came back from my injury, he flipped me over to linebacker, and I played there for the last 2 years. I started my senior year every game. I started, I think, the last game of the year, my junior year, I split time as a junior.
Did you have like herniated discs or bulging discs
Yes.
in your back? Yeah, that's what I have too. That's so
I had
difficult
They
to
told me I couldn't
treat.
play again, and so they said I couldn't play again. I kind of soaked it in, and I went home. It was in the beginning of camp, and they said, you can't, you're not gonna be able to play anymore.
Was it
Uh,
Bob Howard and Doc A?
yeah. Yes. And
Yeah.
then I went and saw some specialists, and then one, I can't even remember the name, but one of the trainers, they put me with somebody to try and just to get me back physically.
Did they give you injections at all?
Nope, I never had anything. So they basically did physical therapy. I had a physical. UConn was great about this. They gave me a physical therapist.
Yeah.
I would go in there, and I was religious with it. And in 6 months, I got to the point I went and saw doctors, and they said I was, if I wanted to, I'd go back and play. So
They cleared you. Okay.
yeah, had to go through a bunch of hoops. A couple of doctor in Philadelphia, doctor in New York.
Oh my God. Wow.
Yeah. And they said I could go and play because back then it was different. It's you
Yeah.
get a herniated disc. They put you in physical therapy. Basically,
Yep.
if you recover, you come back. Right.
Yeah.
Back then, they thought surgery was the only way, and then you were basically done unless you were a pro athlete like a Joe Montana or something like that.
Yeah, the surgery back then, they would either like fuse the discs or they would like try to suck them out, I think.
Right.
That was
There's
like the
suck out. I think they
procedure.
would suck out the herniation, which wasn't good. You didn't want
No,
that.
no, you did not want that. So talk to me a little bit about the last 2 years. You switched positions, you switched to linebacker. How difficult was it to learn the defense and then, get on the field to play?
Well, luckily, I had a great linebacker coach, Vernon Hargraves, who, went on to become a legend in the sport.
Yes.
And our
Yes.
DC was Nick Rapone, who I still talk to this day.
I hear so many great things about him.
He was great. So when they moved me, I don't know that they expected me to give me an opportunity because I wasn't a Holtz guy. I was a Jackson guy.
Yeah,
And
that's always tough. You have to
yeah, but
reestablish yourself and win them
right.
over.
Absolutely, because guys like Shank and Shane and Martin, those guys were Holtz's recruits. I was
His
not.
boys. Yeah.
But I would talk to Holtz, and he gave me an opportunity, and then I did well with it. Moved up the depth chart. I mean, I think when I moved over to fullback, from fullback, I was buried on the depth chart at linebacker. But I did really well in spring ball. I moved up to like I want to say I was like number 2 at one of the positions, and then the whole year I was basically the 4th guy. So I played all 3 positions. So I probably played about I would say half the game, but I would play half to a third of the game every game. But I'd play all 3 positions, and then at linebacker, and then
So you were playing Mike, Will, and Sam? You
yes,
played all 3? Wow.
yeah, and then I was the coverage guy that my junior year. I was when they needed a linebacker, I was a coverage guy because I was pretty fast, so they used me as the coverage guy. And then which you would never do, by the way, nowadays. You just bring in a DB.
No, so you were playing like the nickel. You were the nickel guy
I would
covering the slot.
I was more like a dime guy. So
Okay.
yeah, so they had the nickels guy, but then instead of bringing in the dime guy, if you thought they might run, possibly I would come in. So I would come in to cover the back, chase the back down, that kind of a thing. But it was so that was good. And I started the end of the year at Sam linebacker, and with strong side linebacker, which I ended up started there. And then next year I started every game at strong side linebacker.
Right. And wow, that's such a journey. I mean,
It was a
to
journey.
go from all 3 positions, offense to defense, and having your senior year. Just talk about a little bit about your senior year. Any memories you have from it? Any big plays that you remember making? Because I heard you were a very hard hitter.
Yeah, I was a dynamic hitter. I was an explosive guy. I would come and try to like take your head off. I mean, I think that's how I made my mark my junior year when they would have me in that spot where I would chase the back. Guys would throw swing passes, and I would just
and you would lay them out,
light them up, and because everyone else was playing zone. I was a man-to-man on that back. I just wherever he went, I went.
You just mirrored him, yeah.
Yep. So, but yeah, I mean, like my last game of the year against UMass, I think I had 11 or 12 tackles, which was even though we lost that game, it was a tough game to lose. But I had a great game there against New Hampshire. I had a great game. I had a couple sacks in that game. It played against a guy who ended up being an NFL player for a long time. Their running back Azuma. So it was.
Oh, Jerry Azuma. That's right.
Yep. He was one. I said he wasn't big. He was probably, I don't know what he weighed. Maybe weighed 185, 190 pounds. But I remember tackling him, and I would think, oh, I lit him up, and then he was like squirming out of it somehow after you had hit him. You'd have to use all your strength to pull him down.
Get him down. Yeah.
He was always moving. So he was strong. He was fast. Right. But the feet were always, he was one of those guys that his feet were always moving. You would think you had him, and you had to literally, until you actually had him on the ground, you didn't have him down. So, like, I mean, that's how good he was. But had some really good games. I mean, it's one of those things where, like, I remember some of the games that I didn't do as well in.
That's how everyone is. Everyone is like,
I actually would have to look at the old charts of like tackles in each game for me to kind of remember like exactly the best games. But Yale always had a great game against them. I think I recovered 2 fumbles against them, and
that was a big rivalry back then, the UConn Yale game.
That was a huge rivalry. Yeah.
What was your major at UConn?
I was a finance major.
You were a finance major. Okay. So you graduate from UConn. What do you do right after? Do you get right into coaching? Did you start running your camps? How did that work?
So in my 5th year, I started grad school. I got my MBA at UConn. So I graduated in 4, and then I took the first year of my 5th year. They paid for me to go to grad school.
They did,
Yep. And then my 6th year, because the MBA is a 2-year program, I did it wasn't GA, but I worked in the sports department so I could make money, you know what I mean? And then But I got my MBA. So I went straight through. My undergrad was finance. I got my MBA in management of technology. And then I went into the tech field for a couple of years. So,
Wow.
Yep,
The
I did
tech
that.
field.
Yep. So I took a job in Virginia after. So when I got my MBA, took a job in Virginia, worked for a technology company. The guy who owned the company he's probably still a board of trustee at UConn. So, but he was on the board of trustees definitely back then. And I interviewed with him. He hired me. We talked. I think we talked sports for probably about 45 minutes of the hour-long interview.
They love that because I interviewed with a software company too, and they love that because most of the guys they talk to and interview know nothing about sports. So if they get a guy who's a sports guy, they take the opportunity because I remember the guy that I interviewed with, he's like, I'm bored all day talking to these kids. And finally I got a guy I can talk some sports with and have some fun. Because that's all I do is interview people, and it drives me nuts. So he really enjoyed talking sports. So you worked in tech, and then when did you make the transition out of that?
Post 9/11. So I was working. So I worked in Virginia initially. Then I took a job with a smaller like e-commerce company, like web development company. Rose really high at a young age. I was at 26 years old. I was senior vice president of the company. It was a smaller.
Oh my God.
And we work with like Merrill Lynch and Cantor Fitzgerald and a lot of these big finance companies. And it was a wild time of the really the growth of the internet. Like that was 2000, 99, 2000, 2001, when everything was, you could charge insane amount of money for a project in tech. And there was a lot of money flowing around in that industry. But so I was working for another tech company and I was at home and 9/11 happened. And when that happened, it kind of made me change because I was at the time I had worked with Cantor Fitzgerald a lot. I had been in that building, and that was one of the companies that was one of our client. It was one of my clients in the past, and I just thought, for me, I was good at it. I was good in that field. I enjoyed people, but I didn't. It wasn't where I thought I belonged, long term.
Yeah. You didn't have a passion for it.
Yeah, that solidified it for me. I was like, well, is this for me? Is this where where I want my life to go? If I was a 50-year-old person and I was in that building and it was my last moments, what I wanted that to be what it was for me. So, it was a terrible tragedy, and I, but it enabled me to really think about what I want to do. And that's when I really started to make the change. So I started coaching. I was still working in business, but I started coaching high school track actually with my father.
Wow.
My father was a track coach.
You were a state champion. So, I mean, why not?
I started coaching at my old high school. So, and then I opened a business where I started training athletes. And I was working out of my truck, doing that and going from place to place. And then I started coaching football in the fall. The coaches, we had a very good football team at the high school, and they were looking for an assistant coach. So they convinced me to coach football. And once I started doing that, I really kind of got the bug from a football standpoint, and just kept growing it. So over the years, I had a training. I had multiple training facilities up through like 2011. But really in 2005, I started running like showcases for high school athletes to get recruited, and that became
which they didn't have back then.
They didn't really have it.
That was huge. Yeah,
they had it regionally here and there, like sparingly, but we started running it and we ran it nationally. So we ran it all over the country, and we grew that space, and we became one of the really kind of
you're the premier.
Yeah, we were the premier
camp.
group. Yep, and one of the founding fathers of how you see recruiting now. where the colleges now all utilize the camps as a part of their recruiting process, and which they did before, but not from an evaluation standpoint. We really did the heavy evaluation, and we used to send to the college coaches and give them all the information. And so many of the guys that we worked with were getting recruited left and right, just kept growing kind of the business. The business now has changed dramatically because now it's almost all exclusively in the colleges because they run these mega camps.
Yeah.
But back when we were really doing it through like 2015, 16, when we were running like 100 camps around the country, we would do all the evaluations, give it out and give it to the coaches. And so many guys, I mean, we had 4 Heisman Trophy winners that came through our programs.
I heard.
Yeah, it used to be a place where everybody went to.
Right.
And that was one of the places that you would go and it would kind of jumpstart your recruiting process. And then they would go on from there.
Did you have coaches that worked with you at these camps, or was it college coaches strictly that would come
No.
and work?
So it would be sprint. It would be coaches. So what we basically did was we hired a lot of times high school coaches, guys that might be trainers. So we've had, it's interesting. We've had it's like a who's who of football that's
Yeah.
that's come through our programs. I mean, from guys that are GMs now to in the NFL to players to top trainers, like Patrick Mahomes' quarterback coach, Jeff Christensen. I always tell a story when Jeff came and worked with me back in like 2009, 2010. He had played in the NFL as a quarterback for many years. And he was looking to really kind of show people how good he was as a quarterback. And he would work our Chicago events. I would say the number one quarterback guru in the country, Jeff Christensen, used to do the vertical jumps, and he would do the sticks at the vertical jumps for us. And then he would coach the quarterbacks when we would get to the skills portion of everything. But it's been a who's who. We would hire them from all over the country in each area to really work with us.
Yeah, because now it's really turned into the schools that do the one-day camps.
Correct.
And that's the evaluation.
Correct.
But back then, so the Heisman Trophy winners you worked with, I know Johnny Manziel was one of them.
Marcus Mariota, Derrick Henry.
Oh wow.
Kyler Murray. Yep. And then Trevor Lawrence played. He wasn't a Heisman Trophy winner, but Trevor Lawrence, I think he was the number one pick. He played in our All-Star game when he was in 8th grade. So I mean, you could. There's thousands and thousands of guys, but yeah, at one point there was a point where I think it was 4 out of 5 years in a row. One of the Heisman Trophy winners, the guys that had come to our camp.
So out of the Heisman Trophy winners that you worked with, who was your favorite? I'm going to put you on the spot.
The most physically impressive by far was Derrick Henry.
Derrick Henry, yeah.
He came and we hosted at his high school. So he was in 8th, I think, and 9th grade when he did it. But he was already he was a beast. Yes. Johnny Manziel went to our local, I think it was our Austin event, and then he played in our All-Star game on the same. So I would say, and on the same team, one of our All-Star games, the same team was Johnny Manziel and Marcus Mariota. They were the 2 quarterbacks on one of the teams. That was interesting. But Johnny Manziel was actually he was incredibly dynamic. And then Kyler Murray, I remember when Kyler Murray came, I think he came as a sophomore, I believe it was, either sophomore or freshman year. And they gave him the quarterback award. The coaches called me. I wasn't there. The coaches called me at home, and they're like, listen, I want you to know we're giving a quarterback award to a quarterback that's only 5'3". Because we used to have a thing where, they had to be, if you were giving awards out, we wanted to make sure they were recruitable guys too. It wasn't
sure.
So
because you had a reputation to maintain.
Yeah. So they called me up to let me know. They said, we've never seen anything like this guy. He's already starting. I can't remember what high school he was at the time. I think it might have been DeSoto, but he was already starting as a sophomore. So they said, this guy's incredible. and it was Kyler Murray. It was funny because I was like, all right, give him an award. I'm like, I don't know if he'll ever be recruited at that height, but like, give him an award. It was Kyler Murray.
Oh my God, that is such a great story. Um, Now you have done camps nationally, and you said you run upwards to 100 camps
We did
all over
back
the
then. Yeah.
country.
Yep.
And okay, that's insane. So you're literally traveling, and was I'm sure it was on weekends. Was it multi-day camps or one-day camps or
So it evolved. We at first started with 1 day camps, but then it ended up being multi-day. At one point, they were really big, especially in the big city areas, where there would be multi-days. We bring in different groups, but it used to be like a full weekend. We used to do
oh
like,
wow.
yeah,
It
we would.
was it in pads too?
No, it was just in shorts, and we give them a shirt, and but it would be so you would come in depending on what group you're in, and you would come in for that time period. Some kids would come for 1 day, but we had like recruiting seminars and things like that throughout the weekend. And we did that. I mean, we did that through 2016. Our business changed dramatically now because it's just
Yeah.
because we're doing a lot more actual direct recruiting work, and like a lot more stuff with the podcast. Like we do very well from YouTube and the stuff that we do podcasting and talking about recruiting and talking with top
Because
gear.
so
So
many people don't know. Yeah.
yeah, it's changed that part's changed dramatically. Luckily, I've been able to figure it out all the way through. So
You have, yes.
I never had to go get a job, even though I'm sure my wife at times would like to go get one, but I've never had to go and actually go back into corporate or anything like that again. But which I'm lucky, I'm blessed to be able to do something that I like and really enjoy and be able to make a living from it.
Talk a little bit because you were still training athletes. You were training high school athletes. Were you also training athletes getting ready to play professionally as well?
So our training side, we had every level. So from
Okay.
professional athletes to, but most of it was kids in training.
Okay.
Most of it would be like teenagers or middle school kids. And we did that through 2011. Um, but the camps were so big that the partner I had in the training side, even though he worked with us on the camp side, he was really more enjoyed the training side. I really enjoyed more the camp side, the recruiting side, and we kind of worked towards where our strengths were. So I got away from the training in 2011. We would do a lot of these 1 day programs at the camps, and then
Right.
and we still to this day, like we still have like different camps that we'll run where we're working on instruction and stuff like that. But yeah, the training facilities went away. We had one time had 3 training facilities, but that went away. That was yeah, I always said that was a really, really important part of what I was doing at the time business wise, because I learned a lot from it. But it was
Yeah.
difficult. Training business is a difficult business.
It
Uh,
is.
Very difficult business to make work. And you work a lot of hours on it, and then you look at the end of the day, you're like, okay, this is the most financially you can make from it.
Yeah.
Um, and
You
and
charge per hour or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's basically hourly, right? So
Yeah.
and as you get older, it becomes harder. So when I was young, when I was
Yeah. You
26,
didn't
I mean,
mind. Yeah.
yeah, when I got to be 35, that was a different thought process,
Yeah. You don't want to be working, you got
right?
to work with these kids 8 hours. You got 8 different kids. Were you
Yep.
also helping in the recruiting process with these kids as well?
The athletes we trained, we really kind of stayed away from that. We really focused on
Okay.
training. Um, from 2005 on, when we started the recruiting part with the camps,
Yes.
that's when we kind of separated. The businesses were related. There was crossover, but they were really
Sure.
two separate businesses. And
Two
they
separate
operated.
entities. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What we basically did, though, we took a lot of the guys from the training side initially, and nobody really realized when we started running the camps, we were taking all our guys that worked in our training facility, and we would fly everybody out, and we would go to each location. And
Oh
those
my
guys,
God.
Yeah, we had a whole system that we developed in there when we were doing the camps, and the only guys that really knew it were the kind of the trainers in there. And so because we didn't have anybody else, and some of them were football guys, some of them weren't football guys, but we got them all in this system of how we were going to do it, and we started doing it around the country. And what happened over the years was, as we added coaches from different regions, we taught those guys how to run the system. And then at one point, it became a monster where we had guys all over the place operating different regions.
Wow.
Yep. And they would run the camps with us. We would travel out. We would teach them how to do it. And then, I mean, it's something that now is kind of taken for granted to
it is now. Yeah, it is. It is. What was I going to ask you? So you must have made relationships with a lot of college coaches. You must know a million college coaches.
Yes.
Who are some of the prominent ones that you would say that you're friends with or have relationships with?
Yeah, I have relationships with a lot of college coaches. So I'm really good. So guys that have literally worked with me that are now like big time college coaches. The guy used to run our Northeast regions, guy EJ Barthel, who's the running back coach in Nebraska. He's their recruiting coordinator. He's like one of the top every year top 5 recruiting guy in the country. He used to run my camps, and I know him he's from North Jersey. Jeff Halfley, who was the Boston College head coach, who I know real well. He's now at with Green Bay. Kyle Flood, real well, who's obviously Texas's offensive coordinator, line coach.
Was he at Rutgers?
He was
at Ohio State.
He was Rutgers. So Kyle Flood goes back to same thing with Dave Cohen. Dave Cohen, who's from Wake Forest, who's DC there. They all go back to, believe it or not, the Hofstra days. So
okay. When they had a program.
Yeah, a lot of my initial relationships were obviously Holtz, right? Holtz, that group. So guys who played, who coached me, like Hargraves and Hudson, and obviously Holtz, and Rapone, who I'm good friends with to this day, who I call anytime, who's the DB coach for the Buccaneers. He was the DC, obviously, for us at UConn.
Yeah.
It started with those guys. Frank Leonard, who he was at Boston. I'm not sure where Frank's at now, but Frank Leonard, all those guys kind of were in our ecosystem. And then what happened from playing against guys like Ryan Day, who played at UNH. I know Ryan Day really well. Yeah. Ryan Day used to come, and when I was a head coach at Palisades Park, I had a quarterback that went to Villanova, and Ryan Day used to sit with me at basketball games, and we would sit there and we would talk about, because I had the camp business, so I would see a lot of players, and he was at Boston College at the time, and he was loosely looking at my guy, but really we would talk about players in North Jersey, and
because you knew all of them. I mean, they were coming to you. Yeah.
Right. So, and he played in the Yankee Conference, and so did Darren Rizzi. Darren Rizzi played in the Yankee Conference. Darren Rizzi was good friends with my roommate Zeke Rogers, who was a quarterback for UConn for years, and before Shane became the quarterback. And they both went to Bergen Catholic, and I've been down in Hoboken at the beach with Darren Rizzi, and when we were young, and obviously Darren Rizzi's one in the NFL, one of the top dogs as a coach, been around for a long time. But yeah, you build those. So the old Yankee Conference was a hotbed of coaches and players.
Yeah, for sure.
That ended up becoming really, really prominent throughout the country. Chip Kelly's was a coach at UNH.
Yeah.
Yep. So you go through that. So when I was in the recruiting side of it, initially you would tap into it. So, Flood was at Rutgers at the time. Halfley was at Rutgers at the time. What's the coach of Minnesota? The head coach of Minnesota.
The guy that wears the suit. I know
he was at Rutgers at the time. All these guys were there. Halfley used to recruit, was really a fantastic recruiter. He was young, and Halfley must be Halfley's either my age or maybe a couple years younger than I am. And Halfley used to come in my office, and we would literally go through like guys that we saw at camps that we thought might be Rutgers material. So that's how those relationships all kind of got started. And then I was an NFL agent for 6 years. So
that's what I also saw, that you got licensed as an agent. That's incredible.
Yes, I did it for 6 years. So that you build a ton of relationships. So everything, the whole ecosystem in football is
the network is
If you don't know somebody knows the person that you know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So there's when you've been in as long as I have, guys that were stars at my camps are now coaches. I look at the roster of, if I got to go talk to Clemson, I'm looking down the guys that are working there, and I see, Taj Boyd works there. Well, I know Taj Boyd from when he was a kid, so, and I know his father.
That's amazing.
Real well. Yeah. So that's kind of how the relationships work. So it's helped me as I've gotten older in the industry, and
Sure.
I'm an older guy. I'm for football, especially maybe not for life, but for football, 50 years old.
We lie on the podcast. You can say you're 40. That's fine.
I would take that, but the grades.
No, you look great. You look great. PJ Fleck's the guy at Minnesota.
PJ Fleck, yes. Yeah, that's
it. So right now, what is your involvement in the business? I mean, are you still running camps? Are you still training kids? What exactly do you do?
We still do camps. We don't do as many as we used to. We still do camps.
Okay.
We do a lot of 7-on-7 tournaments.
Those are huge.
Yeah, they're huge now. We operate a club that from 8 to 18 years old in where I live in Monmouth County, that helps develop kids. They're in our 7-on-7 club. They do we have flag leagues, all those kind of things. And then we do, our biggest thing is I work with, I don't know if you remember the name Mike Farrell, but me and Mike Farrell have, he was the Rivals guy for 25 years.
Yeah. Holy crap.
We do recruiting programs for kids. So what we'll do is
that's huge.
Yeah. So it's two of the biggest names in the kind of industry that isn't a coach.
Right.
And we help kids, most of the time it's kids that navigate kids that are not they're really great players. I mean, every single one of our guys have gone on to great things, but they are not, they're not the 5-star guy that we're helping. Those guys don't need any help.
Right.
It's the guy that could be a Division I or an FCS player
that develops. Yeah,
exactly. And there's a lot of those guys. So we do a lot more of that now. Literally direct outreach, direct working with players, which is completely different than what I did, years ago.
Sure. But I mean, if you have a player that you're working with and you make a call to a coach, it's obviously a lot more meaningful because it's coming from you, because you're considered an industry expert. They're going to take your word opposed to somebody else, and they're going to take your evaluation seriously.
Right. And we tell them, this is what we think, we don't tell them that he's a Division I player. We don't say, hey, you should take him. We don't say any of that stuff. We just say, hey, this is what this kid we work with, this is what we think that he does really well. And then honestly, the coaches are going to, but you're right. The fact that me and Mike go and say, hey, this is what we like about him, that definitely helps the player.
That resonates. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause we can point out what we see, and it helps them when they're sifting through, college coaches are sifting through thousands of guys, know, it makes a big difference.
Yeah. I coached college football for 10 years. I coached at Holy Cross in Dartmouth. And I mean, all you do is you watch film, you're on the road right after Thanksgiving for a month. You're on the road after spring ball for 6 weeks. And I mean, it's a crazy. And now I just think I was talking, who was I talking with? I was talking to Jeremy Bandy. Jeremy Bandy was the offensive line coach at Harvard. He is now at Worcester Academy.
Okay.
And he said college football now has a rule that they allow you to work with kids 20 hours a week in the summer. So, coaches used to have the month of July off. Now the coaches are all staying and they have to work with their kids. The kids
Wow.
work in the weight room. Yeah, I couldn't
I didn't
believe that. I
realize
was like,
that. No.
I didn't either. I didn't. They changed the rule like 3 years ago. So instead of the coaches having off in July, they have to be there. The kids will do the strength and conditioning piece, and then they have to take them on the field and do position work, and they'll even do meetings. So I just think it's crazy,
It's
and,
so
and
tough
they're
for
burning
them.
out. Yeah,
Yeah, I could only imagine. It's obviously probably more and more becoming a young man's game in a sense that, from a coaching standpoint, because you're there all the time. I mean, the
You are.
ability to be there all the time and withstand that and not, obviously it probably becomes very difficult. Your family has to be very understanding. I mean, those guys at the top make a lot of money, but it's not like they're not earning it. They are
No,
working.
they are.
So people don't realize that those guys are working 24/7 and it's a difficult job. It's funny because from the outside, just because I deal with a lot of parents and athletes, they don't, and you coach, so they don't really understand, you know what I mean, what is going on in the coach's world. You can
No, they
explain it
don't.
to even, no matter how much you explain it to them, the very rare person understands it, because it's not something, if you work in corporate, it doesn't make sense to you what they're
They
doing.
don't think you work full time. Like I've had people say, "Oh, you coach? Is it a full time job?" Like they can't. Like, what do you do? I'm like, what do you mean? You watch film, you game plan, you do self scouting. There's there's spring ball, there's winter workouts. There's so much that goes into it, and they're just blown away by it. Like it's football. Like, why is it so much work? Why is it so complicated? I just before I let you go, I just wanted to ask two things.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on the NIL, the transfer portal, and now for the first time ever, college football players are going to be getting paid by the universities off of the television contracts that was just passed?
Yeah, so that's probably a whole podcast in itself.
Yeah, I know. I threw a lot at you.
But no, so first of all, NIL and transfer portal coming in at the same time, I think created a very chaotic environment where
It did.
The Wild West. Nobody really understood. It was something that had to happen at some capacity, but there were no parameters, right? So I think that's the hardest part about the whole thing. I think it's good for players to be able to control their own destiny financially if they have the capabilities. I don't think people realize that it's the small minority of people that are really getting paid. Like, your
Correct.
quarterbacks are, maybe your top receiver, maybe, your top guys. Everybody else is getting something, but it's not in the same capacity. And that's why you see so many of buy my shorts 10% off type of thing. That's my NIL deal, right? It's not really an NIL deal. But it's good for them to be able to get something. I think that's obviously was needed. I think the transfer portal, there's pros and cons to it. The con is it's very hard to develop your team over time.
Well, because the kids, you got to recruit your own kids because now it's where, okay, after a year, if they're not happy, if they don't see themselves having a chance to play, they're out. And I don't know if there's any regulation. Like I would always say, because I live by Syracuse, if I was Syracuse, I would go on Alabama's depth chart and look at their third or fourth string quarterback and send them a DM on Twitter saying, "Hey, you want to come to Syracuse?" and put them in the transfer portal.
I think that's what they do. I think that's not too far flung, right? I don't think it's too far flung. Tampering is definitely an issue.
Yeah. And I think they have to regulate the money.
Absolutely.
They got to find a way, like even with like a salary cap or something, like each team gets $2 million a year or whatever to spend on players, because there's the haves and the have-nots, and the Power 5 conferences are all going to be able to pay more and get the better players. The group of 5 doesn't have the money, and they're always going to fall short.
I think you're going to have 1A I'm using the old school terms of this here.
Yes.
1A,
Yep.
1 AA, and 1 AAA, basically. So
Yeah.
you're going to have the big conference schools, and you may even have a breakaway from the best teams in those big conference schools eventually, depending on how well they perform.
I agree with you. Yeah.
So they're all going to want to play each other, make the most money they can. The players will do well, especially since as the TV contracts, which you brought up on your third point, the TV contracts are going to split money there. So the better teams will those players will do the best there. But then it becomes, okay, I use an example. Rutgers is a good example. Like if Rutgers, they supposedly have a great recruiting class right now, but like if Rutgers doesn't get there to the next level, what happens eventually there?
Well, they go 5-7 every year, and they still get $40 million. I mean,
right.
that's they still get paid, but
they still get paid.
But Rutgers, their ceiling, like I can't see them winning 8 or 9 games in the Big Ten. Can they? Do you think they're capable of that?
Well, they have a great recruiting class coming in this year.
They do, yeah.
Which is awesome. But the question always becomes: is this? First of all, will you be able to hold on to it? And if anybody could do it, I mean, that's why they hired Chiano, right?
Because that's
he can do it.
He's great. Yeah.
But the hard thing becomes, okay, so all those kids come in. This is the harder thing for Rutgers. They come in, they play, they do really well. Okay, and let's say maybe they have a breakthrough year. Maybe they go 8-4, right? They have a breakthrough year. Well, Alabama is certainly going to be looking to give an extra $1 million to those guys. And I can say it from like on the plus side, for UConn and basketball benefited the men's side from getting a player from Rutgers this past year, right?
They did.
Spencer,
it was huge.
I think it was Spencer, right? Was that
yes?
So he was a big player. I think Newton may have been also originally a transfer, right?
Yep,
so
they had 2.
So UConn's benefited from that on the basketball side because Hurley's he's amazing, and thank goodness we were able to keep him.
Everyone says that, yeah.
Oh, thank goodness. But that's the issue, I think, for like a Rutgers. Like, so do they continue? They have a breakthrough year. They do really well. Do they keep those recruits, those players, right? Or do they go get more money somewhere else? That's where NAL, the issue is the haves and have-nots. Because what do you do if you're Georgia Southern and your player is a star? He's going to go right down the block to Georgia and take it. And I saw a coach from, I want to say it was Kent State. And basically he's talked about what his recruiting pitch was. And I thought it was interesting. He said his recruiting pitch was come here, have an opportunity to play. If you become a star and you move on somewhere else, we'll thank you for playing for us, And if you're not a star, if you weren't a star and you're developing, this is a place that you could continue to develop until you're ready. If it takes you the full 5 years, so those schools, those group of 5 schools,
interesting. Yeah,
it's an interesting approach. So now I can maybe get a better player. That his approach is, hey, you might be a really good player. Here's an opportunity to start right away. And if you leave us, leave us,
thank you for your time.
Thank you. We won 8 games and you helped us do that. Thank you for your time. So that part to me is, a lot of people would argue is the broken part of college football is.
Well, it's a pro sport now.
It's a pro sport. The bottom line is that baseball has single A, double A, triple A. So does football now, right?
No, you're right. That's exactly what it is. And I do a show, a radio show in Worcester called Moneyline, and we talk sports. And my co-host firmly believes within 5 years the NCAA will be dissolved and out of football completely because football doesn't need them. They don't do anything for them. They negotiate the contracts on their own. All the NCAA does is get a cut of the money. And he thinks that the Power 5 is just going to disband from the NCAA and do their own thing. And I think he may be right. And the only other reason the NCAA survives is because of the basketball tournament. That's where they get all their revenue. The last thing I want to ask you, UConn. Okay. Drives me nuts. We win 2 national championships in men's basketball, and we're still in the red. Okay. we have to get back into the black. And, talking with Phil Hunt, and he's going there and he's going to try to make some changes and throw his weight around. What do you think the future is for UConn football? Because it's either I had a podcast with Andy Baylock, which was awesome, but he said, great man. He said, we could join the ACC if basketball would go with football, but basketball is dead set on staying in the Big East. Do you think that basketball will stay in the Big East and football will find its way into a conference, even if it's like the Sun Belt or Conference USA or, God forbid, the MAC? Or do you think that somebody's going to talk sense into them and say, listen, get the money, join the ACC in both sports, and take off from there? And we're just on the ground floor of NILs and putting together a collective to raise money to get the better players. But what do you think the future is for UConn and UConn football?
I think, well, for UConn football standpoint, they have to get in a bigger conference in order to have a chance. So, and that means that obviously basketball, everybody would like to have UConn in their conference. Football is the issue. So the issue really to me is this. In the long run with the Big East, even though it's a great comp, the best thing ever was for them basketball wise, getting out of the AAC and getting back into the Big East Conference. All right. But it hurt football tremendously. Right.
Yeah.
But that was the best thing for basketball.
And UConn's a basketball school.
And UConn's always been a basketball school when I was there. It's just how it is. Right. I made sure I stayed as close as I can to the basketball players at a party, right? So it's important to understand that UConn has been, and men's and women's.
Correct.
The big thing is this. If you noticed about college basketball, the blue bloods in football are becoming great in basketball. Alabama, who used to never be good.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Georgia is
Texas,
hit or miss. LSU, I mean, programs that were never Texas, right? Texas every once in a while had a good team, but it wasn't consistent, right?
No.
When Rick Barnes was there, they were good. But what you see now is that the more money that comes in from football for those blue blood football programs, the better all their other programs can get. The more NIL money they're going to have for basketball. It
funds all the sports. Yeah, you're right.
So in the long run, the way I look at it is in the long run, Creighton, Marquette, those schools, they have a limited amount of NIL. UConn already probably outdoes most of those schools, right? How else could we get a Spencer or a Newton to come to us over other people, right? Well, in the long run, though, if the Blue Bloods keep getting more and more money in football, eventually they're going to be able to outspend us. And women is a different issue, a little bit of a different issue.
Yeah, Title IX.
Yeah, but you can even see it happening a little bit in women's basketball, right?
No, some of the girls got paid. Paige Buckhauer's got paid a lot. Yeah, they are.
And what happens? What happens post Gino era, right? What happens in the post Gino era? So that's the way I think about it. I think about it like, in order for us basketball to sustain for the next 20 the way that we want to, we have to figure out what the long-term plan is there, because are we going to have the same level of money eventually as Alabama in basketball, because they have so much money coming through, period, right? Because of football, billions eventually that will be coming through. So
2.8 billion.
I think UConn in the long run, in order to do it, was get a solid plan for football that you could get into an ACC or a conference like that. Maybe you want to be in an SEC, right? Because basketball is because the conferences, the names of the conferences, what land they cover is really irrelevant. Like,
it doesn't matter anymore.
SEC and have UCLA now. I mean,
there's no regional anymore. You're right.
Stanford is in the ACC, so Stanford's in the Atlantic Coast Conference.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So USC is going, and UCLA is going to the Big Ten. I mean,
yeah. So it's really just a name of a conference, but I think in the long run they're going to have a plan for that, because if they don't, It's going to be
And we're a
tougher
public
and tougher.
university too.
Right. It's going to be tougher and tougher. And listen, you can't tell me in the state of Connecticut, where you have some of the wealthiest towns in
We're the
America,
wealthiest state in the country.
you need a plan to reach out to those people, even if they're not UConn people per se, even if they went to whatever XYZ university, you need to start getting more and more of those people involved. And that's the key. And what I think one of the slightly limiting things that UConn has is that proximity wise, UConn is in the northeast part of the state, right? And most of the money is New Haven below, right?
Yeah,
So
way down.
Way down. So their affinity to UConn, if they didn't go there, is not as high as you would get towards Hartford, right? When you get towards Hartford, even when you get towards Massachusetts, there's a large affinity to UConn, right?
Absolutely.
Because we're right
on the border. Yeah.
Right on the border. Even Rhode Island, right, is right on the border there, right? So so I think that's the outreach that has to happen in the long run in order to get there's plenty of money in the state of Connecticut. There's plenty of gigantic companies downstate, right? But it has to be a situation where you have a group that understands that. I think that's that's pretty exciting. I didn't even know that Phil was going back there, but it was
a surprise at the end of the podcast that we announced. He gave me the breaking news. He let me break it.
Phil understands that too because he's from New Jersey. He's from I want to say he's maybe either Essex County. I think he's Essex County, New Jersey, 20 minutes from me where I grew up.
And he worked for the NCAA. He's got a law degree. He's got a master's, and he worked at North Dakota State, one of the best FCS schools that's won national championships. And he's told me, I have a plan. I'm throwing my weight around. I'm going to meet with the president, and we're going to try to get something done. And I really hope he does that. And I think he will.
Think so. I think that's the key. I think the key is to think. You got to think big. We in UConn world, we like to think small. We like to think, it was such to me, most short-sighted thing of all was putting a stadium in East Hartford. That's the dumbest thing of all time. People are excited about that. It'll bring business into Hartford. No, it's not because you're using it 6 times a year. And I'm sure they use it for concerts and stuff like that. I'm sure that's
occasionally, but kids don't want to get up at 8 a.m. and get on a bus and go to Hartford and tailgate, And it was the argument was there was so much land where they could have put a stadium. The argument was they didn't want the traffic on 195.
Penn State
has traffic on 195 all the time.
I have to tell you, one of the things that Tom Jackson, back when he was trying to get it before he got fired, back when he was trying to continue to push that envelope himself, that was the argument back then. Was you can't build a stadium, and his whole thing. He was a Penn State guy. His whole thing was Penn State.
Same deal.
It's the same deal.
One road takes you right there.
Just build it, and you'll figure it out. You'll figure it out. And you know what? People will deal with the traffic. If it's a 60,000 seat stadium and then you have a nice weekend on campus and there's hotels and restaurants, people go I don't know if
gravitate to that.
You ever been to an SEC game, right? If you ever been to an SEC game, you tailgate an SEC game. I've been to Georgia. I've been over else.
Yeah. And you go 8 a.m.
It's an event. Everyone wants to be on campus. They eat in the little breakfast spots. They stay in the hotels. They see people they haven't seen in years. That's what it is. And I think that's the negative to having it in Hartford. There's no connection to UConn per se.
No, I agree with you. And, that's the one thing Phil Hunt told me. He wants me because, he's been so supportive and thankful that I've done Husky Talk, and he wants to do more with it. He wants to use it as a connection to alumni to hopefully bring more people in and, even do a live Husky Talk at a UConn game, set it up, bring my equipment, tailgate, have everyone come and each person come on and talk to him for a few minutes and do a long Husky Talk there. He sees it as a vehicle to connect alumni and bring them back to the family, which is what we need. So that's what I'm trying to do. So I definitely appreciate your time and sharing all this information. The last thing I wanted to ask you, Coach Mora, does he come to you? I mean, does he consult with you? Has he asked about any players? Do you have a relationship with him yet?
I loosely know Coach Mora.
Okay.
I've sent players to him over the years. I'm going back to when he was at UCLA, but
oh wow,
yeah, but we don't have. It's one of these interesting things. Like we've talked about this for years. Guys have worked with me, and guys have in college. They're like, it's amazing that college coaches don't reach out more. And
I would use you all the time if I was at UConn. My God, I'd call you every day. I know.
And I got along great with it. I got along great with Edsel, and even though I didn't play for him, but I got along great with Edsel. I just because I knew him from, I was coaching and running the stuff. Edsel would have a guy that would talk to me, especially at the end of round one. Edsel, round two, Edsel was a different kind of guy. Like
he was.
Listen, he was a guy. I would say round two, Edsel. When I see him at a coaches conference, he would talk to me for 25 minutes. Round one, Edsel wouldn't have talked to me for 25, 30 minutes. Round two, Edsel did. Because he was kind of in the twilight part of it, which
he appreciated it more.
He appreciated it, but he wasn't maybe doing the same things. But nobody
he was burnt out. He was burnt out a little bit.
He was burnt, probably. Yeah, I would guess. And it changed a lot too for him. So
it did. The academics changed a lot.
Really changing. It hadn't changed to where it is now, but it was moving in that direction. And I think that part was probably, he was a development guy, and he had a hard time with how it was becoming a bigger transfer thing. And
he absolutely was. That's how we had success. Was we always developed players from year to year, and he would always try to redshirt guys. And by their redshirt sophomore year, they were playing. So he got 3 good years out of his players. And by the time they were seniors, that's when you saw it pay off. That's when you saw the Fiesta Bowl. That's when you saw like the Papa John's Bowl. That's when you saw, they went to the Motor City Bowl, Dan Orlovsky's last year.
Yep.
He was really good at developing players, and now he wasn't having that opportunity. So I had him on the podcast. If you go back,
I
he is a great
like
guy.
him a ton. Like, I thought he was a great guy. It was too bad how it kind of went down the second time. But I think it was much more than just Edsel. It was really UConn's commitment has not yet been there from a football standpoint.
That's what he said. If you listen to the podcast we did, he was very disillusioned with the finances for his staff. He's like, you want your expectations are this, but you're giving me this budget to hire assistants. Like, I can't hire the quality assistants you want me to hire or keep them if this is my budget. He's like, I need more.
Was Mora's first. He had a huge buzz in the beginning, and he had his main recruiting. He hired, didn't even know him. He hired the guy that I mentioned earlier, EJ Barthel, who's a top recruiter, and he brought EJ in. EJ he was with the Panthers. He had been a lot of places. He had been a lot of places, and he kind of jumped to a lot of places, but he was looking for a spot to stay. UConn, he did really well. Well, then Matt Rule, who was good friends with EJ, got hired, who was with him. He was at Carolina with him, got hired in Nebraska. UConn can't pay what Matt Rule can pay EJ, right? So now we lose the guy who's doing all this recruiting for us. He's gone. And now what does the prospect say? Oh, anytime you get a top guy, he's not going to be there. Top coach, he's not going to be there long. So
you lose the kid too.
So that is part of. I mean, it's an overall thing, but I do think UConn to me is a sleeping giant. It's very different than UMass, and
people try UMass is a dumpster fire.
Correct. It's a totally different situation, and UMass, other than the Marcus Camby years, has nothing like UConn does in basketball, right? So
correct.
And UConn football hasn't figured out how to build that relationship where they can be symbiotic with basketball to really grow, as opposed to being an outlier to basketball.
Right.
But UConn has a huge advantage over every one of these other, including Boston College, New England schools, because basketball is so good. It's a piece of candy, but
It's a draw. Yeah.
we have to get football in check first before
No,
we
I
can
know.
even begin to. And if we could do that, I mean, and I think Moore is in a difficult situation, as a lot of, as Edsel was, but you're right. The long and short of your question was, I think college coaches in general, not just Moore or UConn, they don't leverage a person like myself as much because they have their own staff and they think these are the guys I hired to do this. This is their job. Their job is to find the players. How is this outside person going to know more than the guys who I've told this is the kind of player I want? These are the parameters. And I think
Yeah, I know.
but being you've been a college coach, so and what is that a lot of the guys that are on staff, you have really outstanding guys, but the guys who are doing a lot of the grunt work are not as outstanding as those top tier guys that you have. And there's a disconnect a lot of times between the two. And that's the hardest part. And UConn's got to figure that out, which the big schools do. The big, Ohio State knows, Florida State knows this is how we get those players. This is what we need to have. This is what, and I'll give Schiano this credit. Schiano understands that even though he has good resources, but he may not have all the resources. He understands his process, and he's adamant about how he goes through his process. Seeing that,
right,
it doesn't matter what I think or anybody else in the state thinks. He has his way of doing it, and he knows that that'll get him to the best that he thinks he can get Rutgers to. I don't think UConn has figured that out, and
they haven't. No.
And Schiano's unique. Like Schiano didn't play at Rutgers, right? He didn't play there. He is a New Jersey guy.
He is.
And I think
he was a great New Jersey recruiter when he came in.
That was an advantage, right? And he was a great Florida recruiter. Mora is not from the Northeast.
He is not. He doesn't have those connections.
And that's where to me, even people will say, "Oh, you need a Connecticut." You don't need a Connecticut guy. You need a guy that understands the Northeast landscape. And then obviously can grab from the South as much as needed, and be able to start to do that. So it's a kind of an old school thought process because you can recruit now anywhere you want from it. But the truth is, if I grew up in the Northeast, there's still a proximity to certain schools. I know about certain schools. Yes, I watch Alabama on TV. Well, if Alabama does offer me in the short run, more than likely, it doesn't matter what school in the Northeast offers me, I'm probably going to Alabama.
You're going to Alabama. Yeah.
Right. But the outside of those players, there's a lot of really good players in that Northeast corridor, and we have to have someone that understands that landscape. And I think that it would be unique to be able to build relationships with high school coaches because guys don't build relationships anymore with high school coaches.
UConn, even Randy had issues with the high school coaches because I coached at Windsor High School, and all the Connecticut high school coaches complained that he didn't obviously think Connecticut football was that good. So he didn't cultivate relationships necessarily with the high school coaches in Connecticut. And that was frustrating to them, because they wanted like some games that they could go to. They wanted invite to games, have a top Connecticut prospect day, do something like that. And he kind of poo-pooed it. He kind of ignored it.
See, that doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, that's the thing that I think. You
got to take care of your own state.
You do. And Diaco, they thought was going to be kind of that guy, but
Diaco.
It was like we went about 50% of the way there on Diaco.
Diaco.
He was
the civil rivalry.
He's from New Jersey, but he wasn't like you need a ground. Bob, this is why Danny Hurley is such a great coach. And is perfect for UConn although he's been successful everywhere he's been, but it's really perfect for UConn and could have, I would say, the most extreme level of success, which is what he's having, right? Gino Ariema type success, possibly. And
the first three-peat since the 70s.
I mean, it would be incredible. So
yeah,
the reason why it is because Danny Hurley is a regular guy. Okay.
Right.
He's a regular guy. He's intense. He wants success. He is the son of a coach, right? But he's a regular guy. He understands the Northeast landscape. He understands what people in the Northeast will connect with. And in football, you're going to eventually need someone who understands that landscape and really understands what the people want. Like, how hard is it to invite the Connecticut coaches all up just to it's nothing but
just
time.
Do a clinic, a day clinic. Yeah.
We just
do that at Holy Cross. I mean, my God, that's what you do. And there's 4 or 5 Division I players in Connecticut. You got to keep them. You can't let them go elsewhere.
And feed those coaches right when they come up there. Make sure they listen.
Wine and dine them.
The Northeast, man, wine and dine them. Making sure they got good food, right? That they walk away and say, "Man, I got to come here again." You know what I mean? I got to come here again. And that, I mean, that's how the Northeast is, right? They want you to be able to shake hands with them. Honestly, everybody wants you to recruit their kid. Okay.
Of course they do. Yeah.
But it's less about that. It's more about, hey, do you even know who I am? Do we even care about Connecticut or New Jersey or Pennsylvania or
they just want to be loved up. Yeah.
They want to be loved up. And once that happens, I think that will start to really change it. And it has to be genuine, obviously, but that would start to change the process there. I think Holtz understood that. I think Holtz
he did.
He wasn't here long enough, to have that impact over time. But over a short time,
he would have. He would have been fine going to 1A. And when we built Rensselaer Field from 2003 to 2010, we sold out just about every game. It was 40,000 people, and Rensselaer Field had the ability to expand to 60,000 people, and then it never expanded. Once Coach Pasqualoni came in, Diaco came in, attendance just dropped, and then now, 20,000 people they're lucky to get. So we're hoping that it goes up. We're hoping that this recruiting class and Coach Moore makes a difference. Just the last thing I'll ask you, do you have anything coming up that you would like to talk about, to promote? Any camps, anything going on? You mentioned a podcast, promote your podcast.
You know what? You can follow me at Coach Schuman on any social platform or YouTube, and there's plenty of stuff there, and you can figure out
I saw
something that you're interested in, something that you'll be interested in. So, but yeah, I really hope. But first of all, this talk is great. I mean, I think
I'm sorry I kept you so long. I just kept going.
No. Listen, I'm used to. When we do our podcast, I say we follow the Joe Rogan philosophy of
That's what I do. That's what I do. You just talk.
You cut it up and people can watch whatever they like, right? They could go right to the part that they think is interesting.
Yep. So, each chapter. Yep.
But at least you cover all the bases. But this is a necessary thing. Honestly, I think it's a very necessary thing beyond just the kind of UConn Husky community in general. But for football, I think it's a huge thing to be able to connect the old players to UConn, and then to have new possible players and families see what we see about the place, right? Because I think that makes a difference. It makes a difference, because what makes Alabama or Ohio State or Georgia great? Yes, they want the new players, but it's the connection to, if you're from Georgia, it's the connection to how many times have you watched Herschel Walker run over Bill Bates from Tennessee over and over again? everyone that's a Georgia fan knows about Herschel Walker, knows about the history of the football program, knows about Vince Dooley, and all the way up through to great teams and the teams that weren't as good, and what was good about it and what wasn't good about it. And I think that's what UConn needs to start moving forward, is like build those connections. Lou Holtz did coach here, right?
He did. Sam Parseghian did.
Yes. So those are the things that guys have to recognize, and they don't realize all the guys that coached at UConn that
Tremendous.
are in the pros, like Nick Rapone, who's guys have been successful, like Skip Holtz winning 3 championships in a row in the UFL, right? So
yep,
those kind of guys, the Greg Hudsons, the Vernon Hargraves of the world. Vernon Hargraves was a UConn alum. Yeah, and he was a great football player at UConn, not just a coach here, and coached all over, right? Coached Miami when they won the national championship, and you know. So those are the kind of things that we want. You got to connect to UConn, and I think it's fantastic what you're doing.
I really appreciate that. And I also told you about the show Moneyline that I do. Next time we do that, I would love to have you on as a guest with my co-host, because you can talk sports. And I think it would be funny to have you banter with my co-host. That's what I would love to have you do. We record Moneyline Thursday nights, usually at 7 or 8 o'clock. So I'll talk to you and see if I can schedule you in a week or two if you're available. I'd love to have you on. So
absolutely.
Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. So for Dave Schuman, the football guru in New Jersey, I am your host, the best podcast host in the universe, Steve Cully. Remember, when life gives you lemons, don't make lemonade. Take 2 oranges and throw them back at life.